I was one breath away from disappearing, and I didn't even see it coming. One wrong sip and my name, my future, my entire existence would have been erased like chalk in a storm. That night, I stood in a dazzling ballroom, a place dripping with gold light and artificial charm, surrounded by a sea of smiles so perfectly practiced they might as well have been painted on. But beneath the glitter and the waltz music, I knew something was off. Someone in that room wanted me gone, not just humiliated, not just cut out of the family circle, gone for good. And I'm about to tell you how I not only stopped their plan, but turned the game around until I held the winning card. Before we go any further, let me say this: subscribe if you love stories that dig deep into betrayal, resilience, and justice. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know the cities and corners of the world where these stories find their way. Alright, let's go back to the beginning. My name is William Hart. I hadn't crossed the threshold of my family's estate in years. That mansion was a monument to wealth and showmanship. Polished oak floors reflecting the candlelight, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors staring down from the walls, and the faint scent of jasmine that clung to everything like it owned the air. But for me, it wasn't a home. It was a stage, and I'd always been the actor who didn't quite fit the role. That night was one of those grand charity galas my stepmother, Evelyn, lived for. She was a master of appearances, a vision in emerald silk, her diamond necklace catching the light every time she leaned in to whisper something into my father's ear. My father, as usual, followed her lead. I used to think he simply didn't notice the way she controlled the narrative, but over time, I realized he didn't care to notice. "Don't make waves," she had told me earlier in the evening, her voice smooth and warm, but her eyes cold as steel. At the time, I thought it was just her usual attempt to keep me invisible. Looking back, it felt more like a warning. I stood near the window with a whiskey glass in my hand, though I hadn't taken more than a sip. I preferred to keep my head clear at these events. The violin quartet played a piece that wound through the air like a thread of longing. Across the room, my cousin Tessa made her entrance with her fiancé, their faces glowing with the kind of perfect happiness people like to put on display. She glanced my way once, then quickly looked away, like acknowledging me might smudge her perfect evening. But I wasn't there for her approval. I was there because Evelyn had insisted, and saying no would have set off a chain reaction of gossip and cold shoulders that I wasn't in the mood to handle. Still, the air felt different. Too tight. I set the whiskey down and wandered toward a quieter side corridor, away from the swirl of laughter and champagne toasts. My head felt heavier than it should have, not dizzy exactly, but weighted, like fog was slipping into my thoughts. I'd barely had anything to drink, so the sensation was wrong. That's when the service door swung open and a man stepped into the hallway. He was broad-shouldered, with eyes like chipped stone. William Hart. His voice was low and clipped. "Yes. Name's Jonas Hole. I'm on event security tonight. Used to work for your mother's company, years ago." The mention of my mother was like a pebble dropped into deep water, small, but it sent ripples through me. She'd been gone for 7 years, but the mark she left on my life never faded. Jonas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your stepmother tampered with your drink. I saw her. Powder, slipped in, stirred once. She's done it before, to others. Never this bold, though." For a moment, all the sounds from the ballroom vanished. The idea that Evelyn, the woman who'd managed my father, my family, our fortune, would try to poison me wasn't shocking in theory. It was shocking in timing. I didn't know why tonight, or why now. "You're sure?" I asked. "Dead sure," Jonas replied. He pressed a small business card into my palm. "If you get the chance, swap the glasses. Don't drink another drop." And then, like he'd never been there, he slipped back into the kitchen's chaos. I stood there, the edges of his card biting into my skin, my mind running through every possible explanation. The more I thought about it, the more it made a cruel kind of sense. I'd recently discovered some of Evelyn's accounting errors involving my late mother's estate, errors that, if exposed, could ruin her socially and legally. She must have decided it was easier to remove me entirely than to fight. When I stepped back into the ballroom, my head was clear with purpose. The lights seemed sharper, the air colder. Evelyn stood across the room, charming a well-known journalist, her emerald necklace glittering like it was in on the secret. On the table near her were two glasses, identical, both holding amber liquid over clinking ice. My father was beside her, oblivious, raising his glass in some half-hearted toast to family and legacy. I moved toward the table slowly, deliberately. My pulse was loud in my ears, but my hands didn't shake. In one smooth motion, I picked up both glasses, pretending I was unsure which was mine, and set them back down, switching their places. "Thanks, William," Evelyn said without looking at me, her attention still on her conversation partner. The toast began. People raised their glasses, smiling for the photographers. Evelyn's eyes flicked to mine just as she took a long drink from the glass I had given her. For a heartbeat, I thought I might watch her crumble right there. But then, I stopped. Her eyes widened slightly as she swallowed, and I saw her hand tremble, but I also saw my father's hand tighten on hers, his brow furrow in confusion. And in that instant, I made a choice. Instead of letting the poison run its course, I stepped forward, knocking the glass from her hand. It shattered against the marble floor, drawing gasps from the crowd. "There's something wrong with the drinks," I shouted. The next minutes were a blur of chaos, security swarming in, staff clearing glasses, guests whispering. Jonas appeared at my side, handing the remaining liquid to the authorities for testing. The results came back within the hour, a lethal neurotoxin, strong enough to kill in minutes. It was clear that someone had intended harm, and the evidence pointed squarely to Evelyn. But instead of collapsing on the spot, she stood in the corner with my father, pale and shaken. The investigation that followed was quiet but thorough. Between Jonas's eyewitness account, surveillance footage, and the financial records I'd been gathering, Evelyn had no way out. She didn't go to prison, my father made sure the matter was handled privately, but she was stripped of her social power, her control over the estate, and her access to my mother's legacy. Months later, the mansion was mine. I opened the windows that had been shuttered for years, let the sunlight pour in, and restored my mother's garden to its full bloom. Evelyn left for a quiet life far away, her influence over my father broken. Surprisingly, my father began to change too, small steps, but real ones. We started having dinners together, without the icy politeness that used to fill the air. And me? I found peace. Not because Evelyn was gone, but because I had faced her, and chosen not to become like her. I had proof, I had power, and I had the chance to let her destruction be her own doing without my hands pushing the final blow. If someone has ever tried to take you down, remember this, the sharpest victory isn't always in their ruin. Sometimes, it's in building something so strong they can never touch it again. So tell me in the comments, when life tried to push you under, how did you rise? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so we can keep sharing stories that prove resilience is the greatest weapon of all.